Okay, so in this video, I'm going to walk through the steps of how to factor out the GCF from a polynomial. And a polynomial is really just an expression with more than one term. I'm having to resort to this super shaky video, sorry, but I think I should still be able to walk you through some of the steps. Okay, so I'm first going to start off with the ones from class today, and then I'll get into the ones on your homework. So the very first step that we look at is, what is a coefficient or a number that I could factor out of both terms? I think that is a great step to start with, just because y'all are used to finding the GCF between two numbers. Now, I know that out of 10 and 25, my GCF is going to be 5. But now, as always, there's always a rule. The leading coefficient, we don't want that to end up being negative when we factor it. So we're going to actually pull out a negative 5. So once we factor out a negative 5, now what we need to do is we need to look at our x's, our variables, and see what variables do they have in common. Well, we see that they have an x in common, but then when we look closer, this is x cubed. X cubed is the same thing as saying x times x times x. X squared is the same thing as saying x times x. So when I write it out in expanded form, you can see that they actually have x squared in common. So I'm going to add the squared to our GCF. Now I add the parentheses. Here's when you're really doing the division step. Negative 10x cubed divided by negative 5x squared is what? Well, we haven't really been doing division. We've actually been doing a lot of multiplication in this unit. So I like to think of that. Negative 5 times what number is going to give me negative 10? And the answer is 2. Now let's look at my x's. X squared times what is going to give me x cubed? X squared times one more x is going to give me x times x times x. It's just like thinking about the multiplication step and figuring out what's your missing factor here to get your answer. Now, here's where I have to pay attention. Negative 5 times what number gives you a positive 25? Negative 5. And then x squared times what gives you x squared? Nothing. So there I am. Okay, now that we got that one out of the way, let's look at a couple of them from the homework. So when I flip over to the homework, I'm just going to go ahead and I'll start with, let's say, number 3. So on number 3, I'm going to follow the same first two steps. The very first one is I got to look at the numbers, my coefficients, 25 and 15. What's a common factor that the numbers have? 5. So I pull 5 out. Now you have to figure out what variable do they have in common, which is the x, and then you have to think x to what power? They both have x to the third. I added my parentheses. 5 times what gives you 25? 5. X cubed times what gives you x to the fourth? Just a plain x. Now, let's do the second term. 5x times what gives you 15x cubed? It would just be 3. What you're doing when you're factoring out the GCF, you're doing the opposite of distributive property. So sometimes when you do distributive property to check your work, it helps to make sure that you're getting the right numbers inside the parentheses. Okay, let's go down to number 7. On number 7, again, I'm starting with what number can I factor out? The number would be 4. Check that leading coefficient. See that leading coefficient and how he's negative? In the math land, you can't have a leading coefficient be negative in factored form. So we're going to pull out a negative 4. That part may not be important now in 6th grade, but it's going to be really important later on when you are factoring and finding zeros for these to graph. So I have negative 4 as my coefficient, but now I need to look at the variables. What variable do they have in common? A. And then what should the exponent of A be? To give you a hint, it's always to the lowest power. So that's 6, that's 4, there's 3. So I can actually pull out 3 A's from each of these. Like that one has 6 A's, that one has 4, That one has 3. I'm going to pull out 3. Negative 4 times what gives you negative 28, positive 7. And a to the 6th power was like a times a times a times a times a times a. Holy moly, that's a lot of a's. If I already have these 3 a's right here, how many more a's do I need to get up to the 6th? I need 3. I'm going to put a subtraction sign because negative 4 times what number gives you a positive 20? It's negative 5. Now let's look at the a's. A to the 3rd times what? A equals a to the 4th. I need one more a. Then it's going to be a positive because negative 4 times what gives you negative 40, a positive 10. I don't need any a's here because a cubed times no a's here is going to equal a cubed. I hope this sort of helps break down how to pull out a GCF and write a polynomial in factored form.